Hello, I'm Thomas Vandelanotte, brewer for Bourgogne Flandre, and this is the Brewer to Brewer podcast from All About Beer. My guest is Jeremy Pryes. He's the founder and head brewer of Pryes Brewing Company, and he's here for a conversation that goes beyond the brew house and into topics that matter to brewing professionals and curious beer drinkers. Please visit allaboutbeer.com and follow on social media at All About Beer. To support journalism in the beer space, check out patreon.com/allaboutbeer. We'll get into the conversation in a moment, but first, this little message.
First Tea invites you to experiment with Lapsang Souchong tea, known informally as brewer's catnip because of the natural affinity that many brewers have towards using Lapsang in stouts, sours, and porters. Lapsang Souchong is deeply smoked with woody tannin character. It dances divinely with citrus, raspberry, and vanilla. A little goes a long way. Curious to try for yourself? Email info@firsttea.com. That's FIRSDTEA.com to learn more about using Lapsang Souchong and dozens of other teas from First Tea.
I'm Mike Stone from Jackrabbit Brewing Company in West Sacramento, California. I think a lot of breweries do not run necessarily just in time, but they're pretty close to just in time ordering for inventory. And I don't know one brewer in town that gets it right 100% of the time all year. It's really nice to have the ability to fall back on just driving the van over to the distribution center and buying what you need on the spot. It really adds a lot of flexibility to my brew schedule. It can allow us to run slightly leaner on the inventory side, especially for some of our base malts. Contact Malt Europe today and visit malteuropemaltingco.com.
Today's episode is sponsored by Stomp Stickers. Stomp is a proud member of the Brewers Association that produces a wide variety of printed brewery products, such as beer labels, keg collars, coasters, beer boxes, and much more. Stomp's website features an easy-to-use digital design tool, low-quantity orders, fast turnaround times, and free domestic shipping. Visit stompstickers.com and use code BREWER for 15% off of your first order.
Okay, let's get into it. A bit about Jeremy. Jeremy is a seasoned professional in the brewing industry with a wealth of experience and a passion for crafting unique beverages. As the founder and head brewer of Pryes Brewing Company, Jeremy gained recognition for his innovation and his innovative brewing techniques and dedication to quality. After his success at Pryes Brewing, he went on to establish Idle Forest Artisan Ales, where he continues to push the boundaries of brewing. In 2024, Jeremy's expertise in blending different beverage traditions was recognized when he won a bronze award for his beer-wine hybrid at the World Beer Cup. His talents were further acknowledged at the Festival of Wood and Barrel-Aged Beers, FOBAB, where he received both bronze and silver awards for his beer-wine hybrid and cider hybrid creations as well. These accolades underscore his commitment to excellence and innovation in the craft beverage community. So welcome, Jeremy, to this podcast. It's really fun to talk to you again.
Absolutely, Thomas, and thank you for having me.
You're more than welcome. So, Jeremy, you and I met, I think, for the first time in April 2018.
It's been a while.
Yeah.
It's been great.
You came to visit our mixed fermentation brewery here in Bruges, and to outline a little bit the situation, we sat on the terrace of the brewery along the medieval canals of Bruges, with swans swimming next to us. And I remember your wife, unfortunately, wasn't able to taste any of the barrel-aged beers or any beers at all, because a few days before she got to know she was pregnant.
That's right.
You were doing a big tour through Belgium. You got inspired by lots of stuff. Of course, being from Belgium, I grew up with all these special beer styles, and already at a young age, we can taste these different beers. At 16 in Belgium, we can drink beers, which is the age where you learn to drive in the US.
Yep.
We have to wait another few years before you can have your first beer. Your background as well, it wasn't beer related. So what led you into creating beer, or what led you into becoming a brewer?
Well, my background in kind of a shorter path was is I started just kind of working professionally in basically being a chef. I worked in chef and culinary arts for about 6 years, 7 years, kind of going from restaurant to restaurant, picking up things and learning really how to balance flavors. And then after that, I went to college for graphic design, and then got a job, ended up indirectly working for Apple Computers, doing a bunch of things where technology kind of took my big interest of learning kind of like component isolation, break and fix, basically all of our IT kind of stuff. And then leaving Apple and working for or supporting more corporate places, I then got to the point where I really just had this thirst of that initial instinct that I got for working for restaurants, which was, preparing dishes and doing something so that whatever you created was enjoyed by somebody else. And in IT, it really kind of lacks that. It's very much, very systematic day-to-day operations. And so I always laugh when I tell people that, when I was in IT and it was a great career choice, although boring, is that I always wanted to get a job back at a restaurant like one day a week, just so I could just get that knack of working hard and creating stuff and creating that experience. And nobody would hire me for like one day a week. And quite frankly, you just don't have any time to do that kind of thing when you're in one world. So I slowly kind of, you know, the interest was there and I was already home brewing. And so, much like a lot of other people's stories, as you keep getting into home brewing, especially I would say at the height of the home brewing, when basically it seemed like everybody was home brewing at that point, is that I really just started really deep diving into doing everything with like raw materials, all grain, you know. I would say that, continuing that and seeing how many different things and styles in the world were probably one of the biggest thing that allowed my thirst for more knowledge really took over. And especially in a time where all this crazy stuff was happening, where all these companies were making different technologies for homebrewers, because at that point, like in the United States, we have like Northern Brewer and Midwest Supplies, and these are massive, huge places that supplied equipment for homebrewers. But we never had people, I'd say, like decades ago, never had the ability to kind of find that equipment. But now that equipment and that technology was available to homebrewers, and it was just awesome where we could kind of take that and go. And then next thing you know, I decided that this was a path for me, and so I grabbed all of the professionals that I've worked in my previous places and IT places and whatnot, and I put them in a room. And while I knew that I wasn't the best person at finance or you know uh, graphic design at that point because I was brewing so much, that I put them in a room and we decided to open up Pryes Brewing, and we started our journey a little bit different. We started as a dual prop, and what that is in Minnesota is that we would dual proprietorship. I would actually brew beer at a different brewery, but that would be my day. And I'd brew the beer, and then I would cellar it, package it, and then actually sell it, and then deliver it. So I basically did everything for this brewery. Well, for the brewery I started for 3 years, and then at that point we had like 45 accountants, and I just really just couldn't keep up with it. And so then we started talking to banks. Banks said that we showed them our proof of concept and how it was working, and there was a need, and it was working. Our brand was working, and everything was just awesome. And we the next thing we had to do was find a location, and then that started just this continual escalation of trying to find real estate, which still to this day was the most challenging thing that we had to do in this time, is find where we were going to put the brewery. Because with real estate, we all lived in Minneapolis, and so we wanted to stay close to the city as possible because that's where we were, and we knew that's where the people were. And just because we feel like we made lots of business decisions, we knew that, when you open a brewery that's farther away from the city, there's less people and less support. And so really brought us to the cities. And then eventually we found a place on the Mississippi River, which couldn't be more perfect. And we opened up Pryes Brewing tap room and production facility.
What a great story it is. And I remember from all the things I've learned as well, that location is one of the most important parts of starting a brewery. Later on, we'll be able to talk about what tips or hints we can give to new brewers to start. But I think location should be completely in the top of their mind when opening a brewery.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think especially that was a lot of talking right there. I haven't had to tell that story in a really long time. But it's really interesting because when you start looking for locations, and in the time that I've had in helping other breweries open up, like I get lots of questions to me, and I'm sure you do too, like we just want to help out, because the more we help out, the more it helps us out, and the more that we're a community and we're, we all are supporters of this industry. But somebody would come up to me and say, I want to open up such place in such city. And I was like, can that place support you? Is there enough people living there to help you, provide this service to that city? And they're like, no, but people will just come. And what people don't realize is that just doesn't happen. It's not reality. And so there's very much a business aspect to this that you have to respect. That if you don't, you won't be able to provide or do the things that are creative that you have as ideas to innovate and stuff. And so there's just a certain responsibility that, being a business and employees and, brand and how people feel and stuff. And it's just all those things are extremely important to allow your vision to keep growing. So.
Indeed. Now, in 2018, you also visited a whole range of other Belgian breweries. I remember you were extra focused when we started talking about saisons and spontaneous fermentation. I saw your eyes sparkling, and your focus went like a dog seeing a bone you went in. Not really the first beer you would want to brew as a brewer, is what I would think. So what sparked your enthusiasm in spontaneous fermentation?
So, I guess what kind of supports that one is, if you look at the history of craft beer in America, it's easy to go back and look at, certain things that happened. Like Minnesota, we have a big staple that happened called the Surly Bill, which is when, tap rooms were able to open up and you were able to sell beer off site up to 20,000 barrels and growlers and all that stuff. But before that, if you go back like another, 5-6 years, there was kind of like the bitterness war, right? Like, so,
Yeah.
where everybody would be like, this beer has 150 IBUs and this one has 300 IBUs, and like whatever all that stuff means. It was just a time in the calendar in the history of beer that made that happen. So, before that is when I came up with the recipe of Miraculum, and that's when we opened the brewery. So as I was kind of going through that experience of the history of brewing and where we were today, IPAs and like, as far as you have all the technological, enhancements with equipment, and then you have different ways to like dry hop a beer, firm hop a beer, dip hop a beer, all the different ways to put more hops in beer. And then you have like the hops being released, and the hops, like fruity hops, and then you'd have like tropical hops, and you have fruitier hops and more tropical hops. And like, so like you have hops, and then you have the IPA, which obviously I'm referring to because, it's the most popular style.
Yeah.
Then you have like your Pilsners and stuff, and your stouts. And when you have these things, it was always interesting to me that you kept making our raw ingredients to taste more like things that we could use for like our IPAs. And like, what was really interesting for me is, as you're like, oh, I taste this in that, or like, for example, we'll talk about hops again. I taste, the grapefruit, or I taste the tropical in Azaka, or I taste, the coconut in Sabro. But I was like, there was just something about like, I was like, well, why don't we just use the coconut? Why don't we just use the grapes? Why don't we just, like you look at, some of these really expensive hard hops to get it, and so like, as certain beers came out, and then the blondes came out, and then the blondes flavored with, that would taste like mango came out. And then I was like, but does this really taste like mango? I'm like, it doesn't. Like extracts kind of took over and stuff. And so what was just fascinating about the depths of layers on top of more depths of layers that you could create by doing, mixed culture and spontaneous. Mixed culture is really the first one you kind of go for, because as you start learning how to like, manipulate the mixed culture, the different varieties, and then reblends them, you just get a sense of depth of flavor, which takes me back to when I was a cook, about layering those flavors that you can do that. Well, the complexity in like an IPA, and how you can be like, do you taste the Cascade backbone to this, to whatever, and then Simcoe, and like you can do that with hops, but with spontaneous beer and mixed culture beer, you can like make it taste like you reach up to a mango tree and it's an overripe mango, and you grab it and it like, drips down your arm, and then you take a bite out of it. And there's just something about that realistic flavor that you need the flavors to emphasize the backbone aromas and flavors from spontaneous, making it a real fruit. Like you make it taste real. And the complexity of that has blown my mind, because I just think that we exist as people for flavor, and that's just in eating and trying and different cultures of food and all that fun stuff. And so then when you take it to the next step and you do spontaneous, then you're just in a whole different world of not knowing what's going to happen, and the different millions of flavors that come, and are the different varieties of flavors that come from all the different, like millions and billions of bacteria and fungus, and the time of the year and all those things. And just to really nerd out and get to understand those things, and kind of like what you were referring to is that, spontaneous and lambic beer is a science, not luck. It's very much that led me to really create it, and then bring in crazy different flavors and fruits in to create a new product. Is just the availability to innovate in, I would say, a style that hasn't got a ton of attention or renewal attention, when you can do anything you want, which is just so awesome and is an interest for me.
Yeah, I can really relate that. And the link with restaurant is really interesting, because a lot of restaurants here as well in Belgium, they experiment with spontaneous fermentation, mixed culture as well. You can see more kimchi and like
Yeah.
homemade spicy sauce made with fermentation of different peppers and so on as well. So it can create much more depth in a beverage, that's for sure. But that's one of the inspirations you got, I think. But of course, when you were here in Belgium in 2018 and then 2022 as well, you didn't only visit Belgium, but you also went across Europe to find more inspiration. Is there any style that you would put together with mixed or spontaneous fermentation in your top 5 of inspiration for your beers that you make?
Yeah, I think it's, like just like traveling. It's, you can go travel and you can just do whatever you want, and like go see the things and take the pictures. But like, for example, I think you're referring to when I went to Porto in
Yeah.
Portugal, I know with Antonio. So in Porto we did like a 5 bean, 30 Plato stout, like just crazy stuff, right? But like the most of the time we talked, it was really cool being in Porto and becoming very close with Antonio. It was like he also did spontaneous too, and it was just about how people use the local foraging stuff, right? Like what makes Porto very different from Belgium, or, in Minnesota, which is where I'm from, and
Mhm.
like the grape variety is one thing, the spice is different, like, the whole thing, and how you basically go and sit at a restaurant and eat the food. Everything there is different. And, like, yeah, you have your like, your chain stuff, but that shouldn't be of anybody's interest. Like you should know and experience as much as possible what's left of a culture based upon you not being where you are in your backyard. And so I would say that, you know, um, seeing how they layered their foods brought me to how Antonio got to where he was making it. And I would say the biggest surprise I had when I was in Porto was that lots of people in Portugal drink stout. Like I was amazed that when I went to a restaurant, there's like 5 different stouts, and I was like, holy cow, people really do stout here. This is, being in Portugal, I didn't know that. I mean, it was hot, it was like, windy, and I was like, stout, all right, let's do this. But it's like I think that, or even like my friend Yuri from Metaphor in the Czech, he was talking about how, he does, and these are people that I've ran into that do, I mean, let me start over. You can really make a beer with like wine if we're looking at that influence in a bunch of different ways. But when you try certain things that relate to how you blend, those things always piqued my curiosity. So then when I was part of the Hof 10 Dormal, the Invitational in Leuven, um, and those I was around a bunch of people that did mixed culture and spontaneous too, and I was able to go around and try things, and the ones that had this like depth of flavor that I also seek after, I definitely spent the time and communicated with them a lot more, because now we have like lots in common. Like, how did we get here? Why are we all doing this? Like why do we make it so difficult for ourselves to achieve this kind of flavor, right? Because it's not easy. So um I would say that the influence that you can get from everywhere you go it's really important. And also the friendships that you get on there that give you memories about when you're making something are just really important to, just for the fundamentals of doing spontaneous and mixed culture beers.
Yeah, I remember the time, the 2022, where you were in the Leuven Innovation Beer Fest. It was the first time I was able to taste one of your Ideal Forest creations. And what was immediately clear was that you didn't got um, to go for the simple acidity, because often mixed or spontaneous goes too deep into acidity. You get not really complex flavors, but you get imbalanced acetic acid and lactic acid in those beers. But your beer were very complex, very balanced. I would call them like a hybrid wave that flows between beer, wine, cider, and other beverages. Um, but of course, this is a product that will have cost a lot of effort. It's not a big volume maker, I presume. So why did you switch, or why did you add Idle Forest to your already big portfolio of Pryes Brewing?
Yeah, it was just, I mean, it's a good question, right? Like why why do we do the things that we do, right? I thought the challenge was great. I thought the history was amazing. I love history. I love the technical ability of it. I love the depth of flavor in. I also like in spontaneous and in and with dealing with mixed culture. I also love how kind of like he just we all get surprises, right? Like it was like, all my stuff I bottle conditioned. So at the end of it, people are like, oh, like, hey, let's try this. And they're like, and I go, this is the first time I've had this in like, 6 to 8 months. And they're like, what? What do you mean? And I was like, well, it's, it was bottle conditioning. Like I've got many, many other beers happening. And what people don't understand is like, if you look at basically the way I do these beers is, you know, the beer that's in the third or even second or third fermentation of the product. I mean, some of these beers, if you age it like scotch, are like, 3 or 4 years old. So like, it's a crazy thing. It's kind of like Christmas time as an adult, in that I get to open up and, if I pour it up, like, for example, like 3 days ago, I opened up something because I use the pressure caps for my bottles to know when they're done. And so when something gets up to like, 2.5, 3 bar, I know it's there. And then I let it sit for a while so that, I deal with my THP offshoots, and I just let it sit for a while. And then I open it up. And when you open that up, I mean, and you try the glass, and you just, that area that you're in, your little bubble fills with the aromatics of whatever bottle you have, and you try it. And if it's just like makes your toes move, you're like, oh man, this is amazing. Like, it's like that, which is a surprise. And just to be honest with everybody, I mean, I brew uh on average 4 times a week for my big brewery, and that's making IPAs and blondes and pilsners and like seasonal stouts, and I do Russian Imperial stouts and all the gamut of things. This is kind of like, for me, it's a and just again at Pryes, it's not just me. It's we have a massive team. I brew the beer along with a couple other brewers, and then we have cellar, and then we have packaging, and so we have centrifuge and all the things. That's a team effort. This is really about artistic expression, and so without Pryes, I could not do this. This I feel very lucky to have this. This also answers questions about on a small scale of things we can do to innovate. Where
Yep.
Pryes, you can't. You can definitely innovate in a clean beer realm, but this is endless. Like if I wanted to take and do spontaneous and throw like my neighbor's, like say he's got a black walnut tree and I threw the walnuts in there, like whatever I do, you can do anything you want. And so, or like, in springtime in the Midwest, when we drive, we always have these like, the yellow flowers that come up in springtime. And those provide a certain floral aspect to something. And when you like, I would say that ever since starting this program, I have much more of a respect of the things that are growing around me, or an awareness of the things that are growing around me. And that comes from an agricultural sense within the farmers to like a sense of knowing that, like there's these things that we treat like weeds that they're not weeds. Does that make any sense? Like
Indeed.
we kill all these things, but like I'm like, this is actually edible food. Like I was like, really? Like as you go through this like this rabbit hole of stuff, you have a bigger sense of your surroundings that then make you want to know what it tastes like. So you're like, well, maybe I can make this in beer. Like what would this do? And like you just have lots of those weird different moments that you may not experience in, we'll call it the clean beer world. Like you're not going to take an IPA and then take some weeds off the side of the highway and throw them in there. Like that's just not what you're going to do, So I just think that, you know, you know, being, and also I should say that, brewing clean beer and brewing for Pryes and going to hop selection and doing the whole gamut of being, a main brewer is that, the knowledge that you get from that definitely support and help out the mixed culture and spontaneous realm. And the things that I've learned from the spontaneous world have really helped out and improved my clean beer world. I mean, you see a lot of things that are similar, but you also see, you know, me as a process of a clean brewer, has allowed me to like, really still make sure that because I went to school for brewing, and I like, there's things that make me brew the way I do clean that I still am insightful for when I do my spontaneous beer about just being worryful from, if that makes sense. And it's kind of like,
Yep.
I think that's why you and I we can just talk for hours. Like we're going to talk for an hour today. I mean, we're already 20 minutes in and we're already, but like, it's because you do the same thing. You understand both worlds. And it's so interesting because I really don't think that a brewer should be just one or the other, right? I think that you're losing out on the relational value that you do from doing both styles. But I will tell you though, that I do have a separate location where I do my spontaneous and mixed culture beers because, for example, I went, so this is right now it's harvest time. So the apples are ripe, the grapes are ripe. And so I went and I picked a bunch of grapes, like 700 pounds of grapes, which is like sitting around a farm. I get free grapes from a couple different farmers that I really like. And they're like, you can have all the grapes you want. We love what you do. You just have to pick them yourself. And I was like, okay. So you go there, and when you're picking those grapes, it's also the sense of being, right? You sit there, you pick the grapes, you hear like the farm sounds and the chickens, and like you kind of just get a sense of the area. And it's just like when you take that, you take more care of that product.
Yep.
Because when you pick it and you did the work, instead of just buying it, then you're like, these cannot fail, and then you just have a personal relation to that fruit and or whatever it is that you're doing. And then, and then Friday I took those and I pressed them, and that was basically shoving a much labor. It comes in at 2 days into like 6 hours, which is like a lot. I'm still tired from last week. And then seeing that process, there's just like a different relational value that you have with that than if you make like, a stout or a Pilsner. I mean, you guys are a lot closer to the Pilsner world, but like, like I'm not around where Saaz is grown. I'm where I come from where, there's like Simcoe and Citra and stuff. So like, I love the beers. I love the noble hops, but the relational value is that I'm closer to the American hops and stuff. So like, it's like, that's my truth of nature of how I kind of relate to stuff. So, but
Yeah. But I think that's very important to be linked to your local community and have local ingredients. I know we've talked about cherries as well. With the Timmermans brewery, with the Lambic brewery, we use locally sourced Scarbix cherries. And then you said, well, we use the Montmorencys because again, they're close by. You get to know who's growing them. You know which varieties, what the problems were with the growers. So that's very interesting to put into your beers, and that will, in a long term, always win, I think, compared to the wildest thing to add to your beer in the next invention. Here in Belgium, we like to experiment with elderflowers, sea buckthorn berries, and other stuff. Any products that you would see as a typical Minneapolis product that you want to have on your list?
So, my son is 5, and so 5 years ago I planted a Montmorency cherry tree in my front yard, and then
Yeah.
I had my daughter, and my daughter's 3, and so 3 years ago I planted a Balaton cherry tree, and the reason why I did those cherry trees is because I like them to be in my backyard. I like to see the things grow and be a part of it. I also love my garden and all that stuff. So the cool thing about that is the Montmorency is like they're both sweet tart cherries, and so the Montmorency kind of tastes like I say a traditional pie, like a cherry pie. The Balaton, which is probably my favorite cherry for me, my wife doesn't partially like it because it's really tart, but it tastes like a brandy cherry, or like it's like a dark it's a very dark cherry, and it just has this beautiful flavor. And so I'm taking those, and those go into my creeks, and so I think that's just really fun to be connected with that on that level. But even a 5-year-old cherry tree doesn't give you enough cherries to make one creek, so it definitely takes some time.
You have to have some time.
Yeah, right. But like to get to
Yep.
know the flavors, though, there's a cherry orchard that's in Michigan that grows both Montmorency and Balaton cherries. So I'm becoming familiar with them in 2 different ways, right? I use their cherries, and then I also use my cherries, the 5 cherries that goes into it. But as these cherries grow, I'm going to grow with them too, and just slowly keep using more and more of my cherries. I think it's really kind of fun. But also things I'm really excited about is it just really challenging all the other beverages that are out. And so like I just planted in my backyard 2 different currant bushes. We spoke briefly a
Yeah.
couple months about that, but I think when you look at like currants just as a fruit, they're very tannic, they're very hard to eat, like they're rich in antioxidants and all the health benefits from there, but they're also very earthy. And so those are good on a very minimal level, but there's also, looking into that variety, there's also lots of different varieties or types. And so I planted pink currants and a red currant, and the red currant still is kind of fruity, but it still has that very stringent flavor to it, like the black currant does. But the pink currant, I swear, Thomas, it tastes just like champagne. It's so good. And so like I'm starting to grow that bush because I want to eventually use that. And I don't really know of very many pink currant growers. And so at this
No.
point, so I'm gonna take that one on my end to maybe have the first mixed culture spontaneous, beverage that tastes like champagne that's just a beer. Pink currant.
And I think with the wine hybrids, you're already close to champagne. Any varieties that you pick out as being more interesting? Because again, in wine industry, you have hundreds of varieties. So
Yes. So here in the Midwest, the farmers have been helping me because obviously, well, I'm also going to plant like a small vineyard in my backyard. I don't have a big property, but I do have a bank on the side of a creek, and it's all sun facing. So my future is that I'm going to eventually do that. And in this time that I have before doing that, is that I get to try different bunch of different varieties and showcase them. And so my French is really bad, but Idle Forest is all in Bordeaux barrels. And so there's a local series that I call Jardin Locals, which stands for local gardens, or some alternative of that. And I showcase local things in that one. And so I just released the latest one is Prairie Star. Prairie Star is a really cool white grape. I like white grapes. I have lots of spontaneous golden base that I can have different barrels that have unique different flavors for them. And so when I taste what a Prairie Star tastes like, it gives me this really light, crisp, kind of like a grapefruit citrus, along with this like almost like a it's like a bubble gum kind of flavor, and it's really delicious. And so I think Prairie Star is a really good one. I have one called Elderweiss. And if I can relate them to other things so that you understand and people listening understand, Prairie Star kind of tastes like a Sauv Blanc if you're in the California region, and then like the Elderweiss kind of gives me more of an essence of what a Chardonnay, like it's kind of a little bit more woody, but still has like a citrus aspect to it. And if you look at what those taste like, then you'll know that, based upon like what your spontaneous tastes like or your lambic tastes like, is that it has that grapefruit. And so if you put like and likes together, the things that are not like add the complexity to that. And then it's really just based upon your blending, which is really kind of fun, the fun part of it. But as far as like, different varieties like around here, Minnesota just developed the Marquette, the University of Minnesota. They have this Marquette grape that's super delicious. I just picked, it was actually one of the ones that I picked. It's a red grape. It's really good. The next year's white is going to be, it's called it's a Blanc, can't remember it, but it's a different grape. It has a different flavor, and it's really nice. And so as these different varieties come up, they definitely did have their different purposes, and I'm just going to stay on top of it. And as I keep going through this program, trying local stuff, I'll eventually, maybe in a couple of years, when I get around to that project, that I'll, pick that grape and start growing it. Now, the thing that I don't know if anybody knows about growing grapes is when you grow grapes, you don't really get grapes for like 4 or 5 years. So whenever I feel like doing this project at my house, I will have to wait another 5 years to get grapes from it. So I better make sure I know exactly what grape I want. So I'm being somewhat rushed, but then patient with trying everything. So
maybe a second one to put on the list of when starting a brewery is time.
It's time. It's a lot of time. And also don't rush it. It's just a lot of time. And it's a lot of, I would say, even when giving advice to other people, like do thoughtful decisions. Because thoughtful decisions allow you to understand why you made that choice and why you're going to choose separately or go with that path, which is kind of fun. So
while talking about time, we've already talked for more than a half an hour, so maybe take a short break, and we'll put this little message in between, and then we'll come right back for more of this conversation with Jeremy Pryes.
Evoke the memories of hearth and campfire into every pour of Lapsang infused brew. Lapsang Shushan Black Tea is a potent combination of smoky aroma and woody tannins that take you back to that toasty feeling of a warm fire on a cold night. Email info@firsttea.com, that's FIRSDTEA.com, to find out more about Lapsang tea and many other botanicals for beer.
I'm Mike Stone from Jackrabbit Brewing Company in West Sacramento, California. I think a lot of breweries do not run necessarily just in time, but they're pretty close to just in time ordering for inventory. And I don't know one brewer in town that gets it right 100% of the time all year. It's really nice to have the ability to fall back on just driving the van over to the distribution center and buying what you need on the spot. It really adds a lot of flexibility to my brew schedule. It can allow us to run slightly leaner on the inventory side, especially for some of our base malts. Contact Malt Europe today and visit malteuropemaltingco.com.
This episode is also sponsored by Stomp Stickers, one of our favorite partners when it comes to printed brewery products. Stomp Stickers is a reliable resource for printed items such as beer labels and boxes, keg collars, coasters, and more. Visit stompstickers.com and use code BREWER for 15% off of your first order.
Hi, and welcome back to this very interesting talk. We've already talked about the fruits, but we haven't gone really into detail about the project itself, the liquid itself. I know that you started with mixed culture, but then you also started trying to harvest wild yeast. So how did you start with that project?
So mixed culture is just using obviously lab selected bacteria from different places, like where we want to get it from white labs to, like brewery or wherever you're going to get it through, and then seeing how they develop in a barrel. So give it like a wooden vessel to develop the program in time. For my spontaneous one, I had to make sure that I did it and I stayed true to the way that the lambic influence does it and allows me to do it. And so I built a cool ship. And my cool ship is basically about 15 barrels capacity, which is about the size of my Pryes brewing system. And so I would basically, develop the recipe that I wanted to use and then put it in the cool ship. And it's kind of interesting because Idle Forest is like a cement bunker, but it's interesting in the fact that it's got like a 12-inch hole in the top of the roof that has like a fan in it. And so I put a major inductor fan in there. And so what I do is I pull the air from outside, I brew that beer, and then I pour that into my cool ship, and then I pull the air from the outside, which is all the seasonal celebrations of that day into it. And then it blows it on my cool ship, and I let it go. And then I cool it down overnight, which usually takes about 18 hours. And then I take that and I pass that in the barrels and I let that go. And
Yeah.
it's one of those things there's another portion which really gets me excited is I have no idea what's going to happen. And we'll say that most of the time it's great. So it's good.
I mean, it's spontaneous, so always there's a possibility on something going wrong. And especially where you are, you're in a way more strict time frame than what we have in Brussels, where lambic brewers have a time frame from around September, mid-September to around April, May, depending on the temperatures. I know we talked about temperatures down in Minneapolis, and it's already going down very quickly in temperatures. So isn't it very challenging to find the right time frame to do your spontaneous, to not be too hot, not be too cold?
That's right. So for example, it was like it's gonna and the thing about Minneapolis too is that I just looked at the weather and next week it's gonna be 90 again. So like it's like, what are you doing? But this morning, for example, it was 40. So there hasn't been every year is very different, right? And that's the thing that's very unique that I think that when people say like I want to do spontaneous, I mean you can do it anywhere, but it's really the temperature is such a huge deal, right? For what's actually exists in the air. So like, those spikes make it very difficult because you're trying to make it so that you have the least amount of things in the air that are going to make it so that you're not wasting your time on your spontaneous or you spoil it. So it's like it's really about getting those temperatures to make it consistent. But the problem with Minneapolis, again, which we're alluding to, is, I mean, it could snow tomorrow. Like, right? It could go, all right, it's 90 degrees. And then a week later, it's like a blizzard, and then it'll get 80 degrees again. So this like little like transition time between, summer and winter, we refer to it as fall, and we just don't know how it's going to go. But the window, it does come and it goes by really fast. Like typically we have about probably like 2 or 3 weeks before things freeze. But I would say even with this day and age, how crazy the weather is, I really don't even know what's going to happen this year. That 140-degree drop this morning doesn't mean anything. It's really about consistency. So we're probably looking at, I'm going to come visit you. So it means that come visit you next week. So probably like a week or two later is probably my time. And I have that little bubble to hit it. And if I miss it, then I have to wait again. And so like, it's just one of those things that I have to be ready. And it's also hard and challenging because I'm brewing at Pryes that day is not a very easily variable day just to do spontaneous and make, like one or two turns be for spontaneous. So it is extremely challenging. But that's just part of the course, right? That's like part
Yep.
of what it means to do this. And, you know, if there's a date that I have to do it and I have to brew it, that's just going to be what makes that day unique to see what happens. And there just might be a couple more hurdles to jump over to see how it goes,
Yeah, but I think we've talked about it earlier in the podcast as well. Your local supplier is important to follow up as well, because here in Belgium we had one of the wettest summers ever. Same thing with a very warm winter last year. So temperatures are doing crazy stuff. It caused us to have problems already with our harvest of our fruits. There's around 30% less raspberries. There's at least 25% less cherries as well. But not only the amount, which is less, is key, but it's also the product that will come out of it, because it will have had an effect on the variety of fruit and its flavors. So maybe one thing to take home after the podcast as well, to be very close into contact with your supplier and to know what is happening, to not only go there when harvest is done and buy your stuff, but already be in contact during the production and know what it will give, what you'll have to do to make sure that the beer has that constant quality of standard. Now, I know that, and you also mentioned it, you went for hop selection, but that's also something not a lot of brewers do. And it's to know which hops you'll be buying, but also the flavors of those hops. Some markers that are on varieties of hops and where they are grown. Are there any specifically specs that you are looking for when doing a hop selection?
It's a great question. And yeah, it's one of those things that it's a privilege to do hop selection. So I'm very happy I'm doing that, or in a brewery that buys enough hops that it's very important that we get the certain profile that a hop gives. I'll use Simcoe because it's one of my favorite hops that I use. Is that and the most hop that I use a lot of Simcoe. And so while Simcoe's being bred and as the styles have changed, so if you look at, the hazy IPA really wants all hops to be fruity. And so what happens is certain hops are being harvested earlier, and that makes them to have a fruitier flavor. It's what gives Cascade more of an orange flavor if you don't let it sit in the vine more. And if you let it sit, a hop sit on the vine longer, then it has more of like you'll get more of that like woodsy flavor or like a diesel flavor to it, or cat, or like more garlic. And so like they try to find the best time to harvest those lots. And so what happens is, and my main focus is to pick the variety, pick the different lots of the same variety that best represents the brand that it is. Because much as you know, Thomas, it is our job as brewers to make a consistent product while using and jumping over the hurdles of using natural resources.
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest issues we have, I think. As a brewer, we are obliged to have a beer which next year will taste the same thing as last year and 2 years before, while in the wine industry, it's more allowed to have fluctuations and to have a good year and a year which is extremely good, and then the standard years where the product is good but not exceptionally as other years. I think it's one of the challenges we have as a brewer to really focus on quality and well, yeah, suppliers in general. Do you think it will be a problem in the near future with the acreage of hops that went down in the US? I think there's 20% less in the last 2 to 3 years. So less acreage, maybe more focus on standardizing hop varieties.
I don't think they'll standardize hop varieties. I think they're, they put, you know, millions of dollars into development of hops. And so I think they'll always come up with new hops no matter what. Even if a fruitier is more fruitier, like you'll see that a lot of those American varieties, like how fruity, the question is how fruitier can you make fruity, right? And so like as more hops come out, they're just like, hey, here's another fruitier thing that has this note in it. So I think they'll still develop those things, but I also think what they're going to do in that hop world that I see happening is the development of extracts. And you're looking at hops. There's just so many different layers of extraction that you can do from a hop. A hop is a beautiful, beautiful thing. It's really crazy because not only they can pull out different layers based upon whipping around or cryo,
CO2 extraction.
freeze, CO2 extraction, or like all the things, like they're getting different notes. So I really think it's about making and investing the time in the hops to pull out different ones to make it so we have products that more efficiently don't waste things to vegetal masses or not waste the layers of tar that are in the hops that give us that full flavor. Like extracts from a long time ago are different than the extracts and the technology that gets those out of the extracts out of the hops to give us different uses to make it so that we don't waste resources when we're in our brewing process. I think they'll continue to do that. But I also think that, to comment on the 20%, I think we're looking at, a lot of still like post-COVID stuff. I think we're looking when basically the world shut down that in 20 years, I'm sure still talking about, remember that time? But like, that's been really hard on businesses. And, the way I just can remember this industry pre-COVID, things were starting to turn before COVID,
Yeah.
where, there was when people talk about, the bubble bursting, I don't think the bubble will ever burst. I don't think it's like that, but I do think that trends do change, and we can still, I still think that every town can, every town that's not super tiny can still support a brewery. I think that the time of doing, especially with a financial load that a production brewery holds, is just going to be more difficult. I think that those are avenues that the reach is harder the way you are from your brewery. So I think that those things and using things efficiently based upon the cost of things, when you look at a 20% cost in hops, you know, you can look at that a couple of different ways. You can look at that as, price controlling to make it so that they still charge a scarcity like diamonds, but also not wasting hops, right? Because that's just a waste of the time. And, I know in Yakima, when you look at how many hops when you look at the hop fields, I mean, it's a constant competition between, the wine grapes and the hops. And when you're driving on the countryside, it's beautiful to see, first of all. But it's crazy to see lots that have almost nothing in them, which is kind of sad. But like the brewing industry is on a 10-year cycle. It happens all the time. It's just weathering the storm right now. And, for us to continue to put out, the message is still the same it was, 50 years ago. It's our job and our responsibility to make the highest product with the resources we have and to continue to innovate and push and create an experience in a glass for people to enjoy amongst friends or family or whatever,
Yeah, I think that's the essence. And we couldn't ask the people not enough to go to their local bar and have a beer at the bar, talk to the rest of the people, because it's something which is in Belgium going down, the amount of people going to a bar, drinking at their
Same.
local pub. But I think it's socially one of the best places in the world to get away from the socials and to get really social with with friends and others to just enjoy beer, enjoy any beverage, and help support their local producers.
Well, also, I mean, you highlighted on something really smart there. I was going to say it too, because it's like people just need to get off their phones and they need to stop. I mean, I was there before the iPhone came out and during when the iPhone came out and when it came out. And then I was like, oh man, this is going to like just change the world. This for a good and bad, right? Like the good is that I have a device that I can communicate with you in a, in a beat's notice. But like the bad is that you can't get away from it and it controls things. And the pub, it's a part of life. It has to be. It's a social interaction where you can just sit and try to slow down time for a moment and take a moment for yourself. Like there's so much more meaning than just, like going to a bar and having too many or whatever. It's like I don't even know how people meet people anymore. Just,
Maybe it's
it's just
something we should say during this podcast, that if they've listened to the podcasts, the first thing they have to do after listening is to step out of their car or whatever they are and go into a bar and have a drink and enjoy a bit the feeling of having a great beer in their hands.
yeah.
Um,
Well, and the owner's probably there too, like at
yeah.
Den Hegberg. That was awesome. It's great.
So talking about hop selection and knowing your local stores and your suppliers, those are all precautions that you've made to make sure that errors don't happen, or at least don't happen often in a brew house. But you can't avoid all errors, right? So I think every brewer has had a funny story where he was trying to get rid of the yeast from their CCT and was sprayed by yeast, or added hops and got a shower of hops on and had to go home in soaked trousers. Um, have you got any funny story to go, or what was your biggest mistake that you did along the years that you've been working for Pryes and Ideal Forest?
I've got plenty of these. Like
I
it's
know,
like
that's why I
it's like yeah, it's kind of like as you do this stuff for a long time, they say, "Why are you so good at this?" And you say, "Because I've made the most mistakes." Right. And you learn over a lot of time, which is what wisdom is, that you learn over, the 12 or 15 years that you've been doing this. But I mean, everything from like forgetting that there's pressure in the hose still when you're pitching yeast, and then you go to unclamp it, you get shot with yeast everywhere, even though everything's closed off. It's that residual pressure in the hose. Or like when you, for example, when the world turned to fermenter hops, which everybody has this story,
yeah,
but I went to the top of the tank, which we have 60 barrel tanks. And so to the top of the tank, and as I poured hops in there, this is before you knew just to put a couple hops in there
yeah,
during active fermentation, then close it up, and then let the reaction happen, and then open it back up, and then pour the rest of your hops in there. If you do biotransformation hops, and so
yeah,
when this was first starting, I was on a ladder, and it's not even a good story to share, but like I just remember I could see the pillows of CO2 coming out of the top of it. I was like, I
yeah,
just gotta get the rest of this in there. And I just remember when I was going down the steps of the ladder, and I was like, oh, okay, so you're kind of blacking out right now, but I'm just gonna keep taking step by step. I've been here before. And so then I got to the bottom, and here at the bottom of the fermenter, everybody's like, jovial and talking about whatever that happened that day. And here I'm like, guys, that was so traumatic for me. Like, nobody realized what happened. But like,
yeah.
those
The
are
CO2 finds the way to connect and to become larger bubbles. Well, adding hops just helps doing that. So yeah, I think everybody had the same experience with the hops.
right. And then hey, we shouldn't use ladders anymore. We should use a scissor lift when we do this, just in case things. But it's things like that, as you keep, like doing this, there's always something, which is also why this industry is so great, and how lucky we are to be in this industry. It's like we're still crafting things. There's not a lot of crafty things anymore, or just like a lack of them versus what they used to be. And it's nice to be a part of that, and also pull in the terroir of the area, the local area, along with making an organic thing that changes and the challenges that presents. And beer's a lot of things. It's
Yeah.
beer's history, beer's friendship, and beer's a thing, like that we come together and enjoy and talk about and create a friendship or bond over. It's great.
So we've had on our list of hints that we would give to brewers: location, time, and then the third one I would add write everything down, because
Yeah.
Everybody makes mistakes, but if you don't log your mistakes, if you don't log your creations, you never make it to a point where you can redo your productions or avoid any other production. So maybe that would be my top three to tell brewers to start. Would you add anything to that? And then
Are you saying, Thomas, that when you say that you're like, I'll remember that tomorrow, that you're going to remember it tomorrow? Oh man, it happens still to this day. I think that's really good. I also think that, in addition to the time thing, if we're giving advice to people, it's like, go easy on yourself and don't and don't and don't rush anything. Like this, like you can do things efficiently and then there's rushing. So I would say that rushing is just moving too fast, of not, making an educated, formed decision, which is very important.
I think that's a great point to conclude our little talk. We've been talking for almost an hour, I think now. Jeremy, thank you again for this wonderful talk. Jeremy will be back on the next episode of this show as the host, having a conversation with a brewer of his choosing. And that will be on air in 2 weeks. So make sure to tune in. Anything you would like to add, Jeremy, at the conclusion of this podcast?
It's an honor to have a podcast with you, Thomas. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. It's a really good opportunity. It's also, I'd say that as much as people talk to their people, like get out and talk to people, and also talk to somebody that's halfway around the world. I think that it's amazing to have be so far away from somebody, but have so many similarities, like you've known somebody for 10 or 20 years. So I appreciate your friendship.
Yeah, since the start, we've always been very good at sparring, like a boxing game, talking to each other and triggering each other into creating new stuff and thinking of production methods from looking far from it and then going back into it to see if we can make anything go better. So it's likewise. It's always an honor to talk with you. But we talk for hours each year throughout the year. So this was just a little addition to what we talk about during our days off work.
That's right. Work.
Little reminder to the listeners, you can always visit allaboutbeer.com. You can also follow them on social media, and to support their journalism in the beer space, check out their patreon.com/allaboutbeer site. I'm Thomas Vandelanotte. It was a big honor to talk with Jeremy, and thank you for listening to the Brewer to Brewer podcast.
First Tea is your source for Lapsang Shushan and a whole host of teas and botanicals for brewing. Find your fall flavors and aromas to liven up the autumn season by talking with the team at First Tea. Email info@firsttea.com. That's FIRSDTEA.com to find out more.
I'm Mike Stone from Jackrabbit Brewing Company in West Sacramento, California. I think a lot of breweries do not run necessarily just in time, but they're pretty close to just in time ordering for inventory. And I don't know one brewer in town that gets it right 100% of the time all year. It's really nice to have the ability to fall back on just driving the van over to the distribution center and buying what you need on the spot. It really adds a lot of flexibility to my brew schedule. It can allow us to run slightly leaner on the inventory side, especially for some of our base malts. Contact Malt Europe today and visit malteuropemaltingco.com.
Today's episode was also sponsored by our friends at Stomp Stickers. Stomp is a proud member of the Brewers Association that produces a wide variety of printed brewery products, such as beer labels, keg collars, coasters, beer boxes, and much more. Stomp's website features an easy-to-use design tool, low quantity orders, fast turnaround times, and free domestic shipping. Visit stompstickers.com and use code BREWER for 15% off of your first order.